Hello, a great evening to you. Welcome to Business Live. Coming up in this edition, Institute of Economic Affairs accuses governments and, of course, successive governments of treating various financial crises as temporal problems without any major and permanent macroeconomic changes to transform the economy. Ghana needs about $12.5 billion to build a climate-resilient economy. We'll hear from Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta.
Africa has, the last 2 decades, lost over 200 billion due to climate change, and in Ghana alone, we require some 4.2 billion at the national level and 8.29 billion from international sources.
Global public investment and international public finance is leading the course to ensure African governments borrow without or within their continent and finance their own activities. We will tell you more. We have details of these and many others lined up for you. Please stay. Always a pleasure to have you on. I am Pius Kojobaka. Let's now settle for the details. And the Institute of Economic Affairs has accused the present and past governments of treating the various financial crises as temporal problems without any major permanent macroeconomic and structural policies changes to transform the economy. Now, Ghana returned to the International Monetary Fund this year after going through severe economic challenges last year. In an article led by a senior fellow, Professor Alexander Bilson Dakum, the IEA said the country's post-crisis structural policy prioritizers have been temporal in nature only to satisfy donors' conditionalities. There is more in this report.
The article, titled The 17 Steps to and Out of Financial Crises in Ghana, Lessons for the Future, revealed that various attempts by successive governments to transform the economy with reforms to improve agricultural productivity and promote industrialization have either been short-lived or not implemented fully or totally abandoned. These chaotic attempts, it pointed out, have left the economy still highly dependent on international financing from bilateral and multilateral institutions as well as international credit market sources. For instance, the recent shift from bilateral and multilateral loans with concessional terms to international credit market funds with market terms presents further international financing challenges such as debt service stress. Therefore, the IEA called for a broad-based national development program to increase the complexity of production and exports while providing employment to the pool of well-educated unemployed youth. These solutions, it added, must be homegrown and not a set of conditionality policies for bailout credit facilities like the various IMF World Bank programs.
A while longer in the eco-financial space, because the issue of Africa owning its finances and funding developmental projects internally has resurfaced in recent days because of the recent accusation by President Akufo-Addo and others that some international credit rating agencies have been unfair and biased against the African governments. Now, this led to the downgrading of some African economies, therefore leading them to severe economic crisis. But global public investment is leading the course to ensure African governments borrow within the continent and finance their own activities. Now, GPI is a new financing paradigm to support a fundamental change in international public finance to ensure it is responsive to future challenges. Well, joining us via Zoom now is Anthony Mveyenge, the co-founder of the Network of Impact Revolution Researchers in Africa, and of course, a newly appointed Africa Global Public Investment Lead for Development Activities. Pleasure you could join me, Sir Anthony, for your time on Business Live. Now, first of all, I want to understand what is GPI, and of course, what does it intend to achieve in Africa and Cote d'Ivoire, and of course, Ghana in focus.
For having me tonight, this evening. GPI stands for Global Public Investment. It's actually a new innovative way in which countries are starting to think about how to mobilize resources to finance development, particularly in Africa and other parts of the world. This GPI concept has come to the fore now because of one, the ongoing cry out by developing countries on the current global financial architecture, which is a bit not inclusive and dependent on the West. Second, with the onset of COVID-19, climate change, global public goods, so to speak, challenges that are transcending borders, challenges that defy cross borders, they tend to cross borders. We see that there's a need for countries to come together to really bring together effort to fight some of the challenges. So what does GPI include in terms of the principles? GPI has three main principles. These principles are: one, all countries must contribute based on the size of their economies. Second, all countries must benefit, meaning accessing resources should not be conditional in the manner in which the current architecture is structured. And the third, all countries decide. This speaks to inclusiveness, the sense of governance structure that allows equal voices in the manner in which decisions are made in the global financial architecture.
Why GPI and why now, really? Are there specific sectors of priority for GPI to focus on?
GPI is timely. It's timely. We have seen what happened in Paris a couple of weeks ago, when we see some of African leaders were very vocal on the need to change global financial architecture. There's persistent mistreatment of African countries and developing world. This donor dependence narrative has been there for quite some time now, and I think it's time for it to change. But most importantly, African countries tend to not access, they don't have enough access to resources. And if they do, they tend to be extremely costly. You have mentioned before, we have seen some of our countries are being downgraded because of the perception of risks that the West put on Africa. So there's a need to create a platform where Africa can access resources to finance development. And what Africa is asking, for example, is not free resources. We want equal playground, which allows for countries to be able to really engage in a fair system, so to speak. What are the key sectors? There are so many sectors, but now we are seeing some of the key sectors, especially in the wake of COVID-19 and climate change. So climate is one of the key sectors. Health and education are very important sectors because of what we've seen with the devastation of COVID-19. In African context now, African Continental Free Trade Area is a very buzzword everyone is talking about for structural transformation of the continent. So trade is a very important sector that needs to be looked at in terms of the investment that is needed to spearhead and spur the effort into realizing the unified continental market.
Anthony, help me understand, how can one tell if the GPI has succeeded? And in other words, basically, after all the socialization of all countries involved and, well, perhaps the continent, so what really is the case? And is socialization an end in itself or a means to something bigger?
Well, I think how can we know you once we have gotten there? I think number one, socialization is to create awareness. What we are doing now is to really create awareness in terms of governments to understand stakeholders in different countries that we are working on. Right now, we are working in 6 countries. 2 countries in West Africa, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, 2 countries in Eastern Africa, Kenya and Ethiopia, 2 countries in Southern Africa, South Africa and Namibia. And the idea first is to really understand the landscape. Africa is diverse, Africa is heterogeneous. We don't want to have a conclusion of one size fits all. We really want to understand the context of African nuances to be able to tell what does GPI look like. But what we hope to see in terms of achieving the successes of this movement is to really see policies aligned towards GPI. We are not saying GPI to replace the current financing structures that are in place. GPI is a complementing tool that can actually help countries to really mobilize resources. So we hope to see policies aligned. We hope to see countries reprioritize. Right now, I can give an example of some of the funds that African countries are contributing. These funds are based outside Africa. So we hope to see that such funds are being set up in Africa, and some efforts are already underway. The likes of African Development Bank are already mobilizing countries to pour resources into areas where they can go into supporting development in Africa. So we will know we have succeeded when we see policies, when see policymakers are talking about global public investment and in Africa, regional public investment for that matter. We'll see progress when we see governments are contributing, are directing, instead of investing in funds that are managed externally outside Africa, then they bring money here. We will see progress when we are able to see African Union put in place structures, governance structures in place where countries can work together to mobilize their development.
Anthony, quickly in a minute, how is this issue of ratings going to be done to determine default rates of African economies to help classify them, you would say?
I think there's a lot to be done in terms of demystifying the perception of risk that African countries are attached to. If you remember recently during the AFDB annual meeting in Egypt, the president at the Sina spoke very passionately about the need to demystify this, because the perception in the West is that Africa is a very risky continent. But that's not necessarily true. If you look at the indicators, Africa does seem to indicate that it's not as risky as the way the world sees. And that's why countries, they really want to push the manner in which this classification of countries needs to be done in a transparent way. The modeling that is done in terms of classifying countries need to really include African realities, African nuances. Most often, they then tend not to capture those realities. Africa is actually gravitating, Africa is changing, and it's not as risky as investors and our colleagues and partners in the West tend to perceive.
Grateful. Anthony Mvayenge is the co-founder Network of Impact Evaluation Research in Kenya, speaking to us there. Pleasure you could join us, Anthony. All right, let's move now to some other stories we have for you. The Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta says Ghana needs about $12.5 billion to build a climate-resilient economy. According to him, the cost of climate change to Ghana cannot be underestimated. Now, Mr. Ofori-Atta gave a breakdown indicating that $4.21 billion need to be generated at the national level and $8.29 billion from international sources. He spoke at the Global Shield Initiative and the Global Risk Modeling Alliance workshop.
Global Risk Modeling Alliance is an initiative that aims to assess the country's risk and provide essential data for decision-making on solutions to manage climate risks and drive new adaptation investment. Global Shield, on the other hand, seeks to establish pre-arranged trigger-based financing mechanisms to ensure timely and effective responses to climate-related challenges. Speaking at the workshop, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta indicated how much Ghana needs for its climate adaptation project.
Africa has the last 2 decades lost over 200 billion due to climate change, and in Ghana alone, we require some 4.2 billion at the national level and 8.29 billion from international sources to meet the cost of implementing adaptation actions according to NDCs. In order to build a climate-resilient economy and transition to a low-carbon development pathway, it is imperative that we make informed decisions based on reliable data at both the national and subnational levels in order to minimize the impact of climate change and enable development-positive climate action.
The Minister for Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Kweku Afriye, reiterated the need to invest in low-carbon transition and adaptation.
The science is clear. We need to pay close attention and then to the Council of Scientists, because failing to do so will only put the lives of our people in jeopardy. Evidence-based analysis and results should help us design people-centered new investments towards a low-carbon and adaptation transition, or we should transition a low-carbon transition, let me put it that way. And the adaptation, we most urgently need to fortify our economies, and then also to avoid the supply chains and communities against accelerating climate-fueled risk.
German ambassador to Ghana, Daniel Crow, explained the purpose of the workshop.
The Global Shield aims at delivering fast and effective support to vulnerable countries and people in dealing with climate risk and related losses and damages. As a pathfinder country of Global Shield, Ghana will receive comprehensive support in understanding the risks they face and receiving financial and technical assistance to implement instruments of financial protections. These instruments provide quick and reliable funding when climate-related disasters occurs and therefore contribute to addressing climate-related losses and damages.
The Global Shield Initiative Against Climate Change and the Global Risk Modeling Alliance workshop aligns with Ghana's Climate Prosperity Plan, which aims to provide immediate funds during disaster.
We've got more stories for you after this break. Hello, welcome back. The International Finance Corporation has signed a 4-year agreement with the Bank of Ghana to build the capacity of financial sector players in sustainable banking through the implementation of the integrated environmental social governance principles. Now, the program will help banks implement Ghana's sustainable banking principles. Speaking to Joy Business at the signing ceremony, Senior Country Manager of the KFC, Carl Kehofa, said the partnership will provide players in the financial sector the tools to better address and assess risks while improving sustainability in long-term performance. Through the integrated environmental social governance principles for Ghana, the International Finance Corporation and the Bank of Ghana have signed a 4-year capacity training for players in the financial sector to help the country's banks implement Ghana's sustainable banking principles and incorporate them across the operations. These 7 principles, launched in 2019, were designed to help financial institutions respond to risks, increase transparency, and promote sustainability. Speaking to Joy Business at the signing ceremony, Senior Country Manager of IFC, Carl Kehofa, said the training will support and develop the country's financial sector.
Banks will incorporate this, implement, and become core principles of how they operate to make them more sustainable, and just will enable Ghana to have just a stronger, more resilient, more sustainable recovery and a bigger banking system going forward for the benefit of the people of Ghana.
On his part, Head of Banking Supervision at the Bank of Ghana, Osei Jisi, said this agreement will go a long way to complement efforts of the regulator in ensuring a resilient and sound financial sector.
It is going to have a cascading effect on the how ESG issues are handled across the industry. So it's going to be a win-win approach in the sense that the regulator is going to benefit, and the spillover effect on the institutions that we supervise, to the extent that we'll be able to give guidance to these institutions so that they also will improve upon whatever ESG framework they have in place.
Donor for the training program, Swiss Economic Corporation and Development Ghana, said it is committing $1.5 million to ensure financial sector players are trained on environmental, social, and governance principles. Dr. Simone Hebeli is the Deputy Head of Mission of Switzerland.
Our way of cooperation is that we finance the IFC to be able to assist the relevant stakeholders to improve their capacity. So this is how it's usually done. The reason why we think this is important is, and I think you have heard this from the representatives of the Bank of Ghana, is that businesses who respect green principles, better standards in terms of governance, social and environmental, are more viable businesses. So in this very specific project on ESG, integrated ESG, it's $1.5 million. And that's grant money, that's a gift.
Now, the Ministry of Communication says it is working to expedite processes involved in passing the legislative instrument for the National Information Technology Agency. According to the Minister for Communications and Digitalization, Ursula Wusu-Ekufo, the LI would aid in regulating activities within the space. She spoke to Joy Business at a stakeholder meeting to review the legislative instrument for the NITA.
The law makes broad provisions, but how those provisions will be implemented need to be guided by legislative instrument. The NITA Act was passed in 2008. So was the Electronic Transactions Act. In fact, they are Act 771 and 772. They were all passed at the same time. Unfortunately, for some reason, we still don't have the LI, which will help operationalize those laws. So we've been trying to implement it and struggling, because if you want to register service providers, they will ask you, how are we going to do it? You can't just make it up as you go along. So since I can't answer for what happened before I became minister, the harm has already been done. Since 2017, we've been working on operationalizing the Act. But this is a very broad sector. You need funds to be able to even get consultants to draft the requisite legislation for you, which you would work with the Attorney General's office to operationalize. It's taking us this long to secure the funding, to get the consultants to do the work, and to produce a draft which we can all work with and submit to the Attorney General's office for finalization, as they would also transmit that to Parliament. Like I said in my presentation, it's better late.
Now, the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program has announced its intention to develop a comprehensive legal framework designed to provide incentives and support local entrepreneurial ventures. Here is more from the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Symposium held in Accra.
The symposium was under the theme, Creating Sustainable Development Through Collaborative Innovation and Commercialization. Speaking on the sidelines of the event, Chief Operations Officer at the National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program, Kofi Owusu Nkansa, said the legal framework aims to create an enabling environment where aspiring entrepreneurs can thrive.
If you look at the IP filings for 2021, Asia alone submitted 67% of the global filings. This is what is motivating us to also know that if Asia, which was almost similar to Africa in terms of development and strength and innovation, 40-50 years ago, is now ahead of Europe and North America. Then if you also do the right investments, then we can also get there. So how are we going to do that? We are looking at getting a legal framework to back the operations of NEIP to become a legal body which will drive innovation, like the way we have the Israel Innovation Authority, South Africa Technology Innovation Agency, which will be a law to provide incentives for the innovation ecosystem to also to support us with resources and other things to be able to do the work well. And also, we are going to do contests like the National Innovation Challenge, the High School Innovation Contest, and the National Innovation Hackathon. These, we think, will help us to harness the best innovative ideas.
President of the Association of Ghana Startups, Solomon J, stated that his outfit, along with other ecosystem partners, is focusing on educating entrepreneurs on the need for intellectual property protection.
When people have an idea to start a business, or how do they protect their idea, is very key to us. There is a law, there is an IP office, under the Office of Registrar General Department, is there, but the question is how accessible it is to startups, or to young people. And the process that you go through and all that, and what kind of ideas can you even protect? So it's always a challenge. It's always a challenge when you have young guys have innovations and they cannot protect it because we are told that ideas is not one person's mind. Okay, so it's always a challenge. But we want to see a way where we can protect the young person's idea. People have ideas. We talk to young people, they have brilliant ideas. But how do you protect their ideas? It's key as well. And we don't really have that facility yet.
The Maiden Innovation and Entrepreneurship Symposium served as a platform for knowledge sharing, networking, and collaborative discussions on bolstering the entrepreneurial landscape.
Now, the African Institute of Sanitation and Waste Management is partnering with Maxwell Investments Group to build capacity of logistics and supply chain managers on new trends in the industry. The partnership seeks to promote sustainable business growth and through knowledge sharing and capacity building. Speaking at the first training program on supply chain, Head of Corporate Affairs at the Jospon Group, Sophia Kudoji highlighted the need for businesses to enhance their knowledge on modern trends of operations. Here's more.
Procurement and logistics management are essential for the efficient operation of any organization. Hence, the short course on procurement and logistics management is designed to provide participants with an in-depth understanding of the principles and practices of procurement and logistics. According to the partners, this is the first cohort of such trainings earmarked to build capacity of organizations to support economic growth.
It's not just procurement, this is just the first bit of the training. There are other trainings that will come up because of what they are into. And as I said earlier, the way the world is going, it's not about transactional business. It's about relationship building, and it is important as an emerging, economy and emerging company and all. We need to work in collaboration with each other. We need to work as partners to push the agenda of getting our people ready for what the world has to offer. And so we are doing this together, building this partnership. And it's not just a partnership between the Maxwell Investment Group and Just One, or between Maxwell Investment Group and the KSWM, but it's also between the other partners that we are training along the value chain.
Head of Sales and Marketing at the African Institute of Sanitation and Waste Management, Faiza Ramancho, Joy Business that this is part of a corporate sustainability project to make some impact in the society.
There are other beneficiaries as well who are not part of the ecosystem. So it's like a CSR, something to boost the capacity of logistics and procurement professionals.
Okay, so is it targeting only procurement and logistics professionals?
Yes, this particular one is just procurement and logistics, but we have other cohorts that will do communication, public health awareness, and many other areas that we see that there's the need for capacity building and training.
Chief Executive for the Maxwell Investment Group, Dr. Maxwell Ampont, said the course is designed for industry leaders in the business ecosystem.
We decided to bring together the stakeholders of the MIG ecosystem. So we have not necessarily the community inhabitants, the typical community inhabitants here. We have industry leaders, we have company executives, we have even a representative of 3 embassies here who are to have a taste of what's to come, so that when the project goes into full gear, they will be able to translate or to be able to transmit the message of what we are trying to do with the KNUST ASON program much more accurately, which is that under the SDGs and under AU Agenda 2063, education is very much highlighted.
And that's your business life for today. I am Pius Kojo-Baka. For more news, kindly log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Great stories on that portal for you. A Made in E-Learning Ghana conference to focus on accessible tertiary education. We've got great stories on that portal. You just want to log on to that. And that's it for the program. Let's connect same time tomorrow. See you. Bye.